God, please guide us all so that we can, by looking at the dark characters in the epics, detect and correct the darkness that is there in our own hearts. Hare Krishna. So, in Western philosophy, there's a term which comes up very frequently, which is not that common generally in the Indian tradition.
Thread of garland. Sorry.
So, and that term is human nature. We talk about the soul's nature or our essential nature. Now, in the Western tradition, because of there is no, while there is an understanding, at least in Christianity, that there is a soul, but they don't really typically separate the soul from the body. And because of that, the idea is that the soul and the body are more or less, the soul is different but still is not different. And that's why in the Christian tradition, it's going to disconnect again. So they have the concept of resurrection. Now resurrection is very different from the Vedic concept of reincarnation. What is the difference? Resurrection?
Coming back to life.
Raising from the dead.
Alive from the dead, but in this context, in the same body. Like when medically you resurrect someone, at the resuscitation also you have this defibrillators if somebody's got a heart attack to revive them. So, but resurrection is basically like Christ is said to have resurrected. And the idea is the person comes back in the same body, looking exactly the same. And that is one of the reasons why in their tradition burial is emphasized. That eventually everybody will be revived in the same body. So of course that leads to some serious logical problems. That say, if somebody dies when there is a 6-month baby, then will there be a 6-month baby throughout eternity? Isn't it? But they never had a young body. If somebody dies when they are 85 years old, will they have an 85-year-old body throughout for rest of eternity in heaven? It won't be heavenly for them, isn't it? So, the idea of resurrection has its logical problems. And this is one reason why the Catholic Church is so much against divorce. Because they have not an earthly problem with it, a heavenly problem with it. What is the heavenly problem? That say if a couple separates and they are Catholic Christians and they remarry someone else. And in heaven, who will this couple be with? Will be the ex or the next one. So they have that problem with somebody who becomes a widower also. But then they can't stop really. Widower. Now the point is, see, in the Western tradition there is this idea of human nature because they consider the human nature to be the essence of a person. So they have this idea that there are different kinds of souls, because without soul there is no life, but there are different kinds of souls, and only humans have the kind of soul that has the potential for eternal life, and therefore they talk about human nature. Now that particular term is not used specifically because humanity is just one stage in our spiritual journey, so we shouldn't over identify with our humanity. Of course humanity is important because that's where we are right now. But the question essentially is that when they say human nature, is human nature basically good or basically bad? So we could avoid the term human nature, we could just use the word people. So are people innately good or are people innately bad? So what do you think is the answer according to our tradition? Are people innately good or innately bad?
Innately good.
Innately good.
Good and bad. Modes keep changing.
Soul.
Modes keep changing.
Soul is good.
Okay, the soul is good.
Based on the concept of soul, it is innately good. But because of this material body, there might be both.
Okay, that's a good answer. So basically, the idea is it depends on how you define innately. That there are basically two schools of thought. There is the political left and there is the political right. Now, the political right generally holds the idea that there is something problematic about people, and unless there is discipline, people's lower nature will come up and they will do bad things. And so the right is about discipline and rules and enforcement of rules, whereas the left, so the right is basically that not that people are innately bad, but there is something bad in people, and it's very important to emphasize that individuals have a potential to be bad, and it is the responsibility of society to make them good. Now the left is exactly opposite. The left's idea is that individuals are essentially good, but it's social injustice and social inequality and social systems that make people bad. And that's why there is a lot of emphasis on social justice nowadays. So the idea is that society makes people good. Society means, say, parents' upbringing. Society makes people good. The social culture, the way the upbringing is there, that's what makes people good. But in the left, the idea is society is actually what makes people bad. So this is where a lot of people may talk about, my upbringing was so bad, and I had parental neglect, and I had parental trauma, and I lived in a very bad neighborhood, and this happened and that happened. Now there could be truth to both. It's not that it's one or the other. But the increasing tendency nowadays is to put the blame on the society. Say, like if some people become terrorists, and they say that, actually, those people are not bad, but then terrible socio-economic conditions, there are no growth prospects for them, and that's why they become terrorists. That's why they become criminals. So quite often, even in movies, there is this attempt to have like an origin story for a villain. Now, why did the villain become a villain? So sometimes it's when we are hearing any story, it is natural to identify with those who are the good characters, the heroes, so that can inspire us to also become good. But to some extent, it is good to also study the bad characters and to understand why they became bad or how they became bad. So it's one thing that when we say, this person is a monster, this person is a demon, this person is a sociopath, like that, when we use those words, we can use those words as describers sometimes. But the point is, it's as if to think that there is nothing similar between me and this person. It's almost as if this person belongs to a different species. And the word is otherify. Now, otherify means make that person as belonging to some other group only. Like this person is not a human being only. So by otherifying someone, we say that, this person is something which I am not at all. And therefore, when that person does something terrible, it's just that person's problem. It has got nothing to do with the broader community, the broader culture, the broader value system. It's completely different from me. So for example, in modern Western history, Nazism is considered to be one of the biggest brutalities in history. So now, of course, there have been many killings that have happened. There have been mass killings, there has been genocide, there has been ethnic cleansing. But what was unique about the Second World War and the Holocaust was that it was the first time that industrial efficiency was brought to mass slaughter. And the gas chambers was a particularly diabolical idea. So then, it is still now, historians are deliberating what exactly happened. Is it like for one generation, all of Germany flipped out? And It was like even ordinary people acted in horrendous ways. Some of them became instruments for the state and they actively perpetrated the killing of the Jews. Others consented or facilitated. So, what exactly happened? And one thing about Germany is that before Hitler took power, Germany was considered to be one of the most advanced scientific states. And after that also, it's like through the Second World War and the bombing and everything. Because after that Nazism is completely condemned. And even modern Germany doesn't want to identify with that. They preserve the memories of what has happened, but they don't identify with that at all. So, at least at the official level. So, the point is, in human history, there are sometimes chapters of brutality. And what happens? So, why do people do something like this? So psychologists, or sociologists, historians, they try to study to understand this. And one of the things is, so we will be talking about Duryodhana. Today I will be focusing more on Dushasana. Because I want to focus on a particular theme before we go to Duryodhana, which we will be talking tomorrow. So, we are going to talk like, how bad people make other people bad. And in Western history, there's a lot of relativism nowadays. Relativism means that, okay, you eat meat. You don't want to eat meat, or you don't eat meat. I want to eat meat, let me eat meat. Like a practical level, there's you do what you want to do. You feel that a male-female relationship should be only after marriage. I don't feel that way. It's I will live my life, you live your life. There's a lot of moral relativism nowadays. But how far does relativism go? If somebody says that, okay, nowadays people say, I have my sexual preferences, some people want to have sex with the same gender, whatever. So, if somebody says, I like to have sex with children, can that be accepted as a name of relativism? But there have to be, when we go towards relativism, there have to be some boundaries. So, even in liberal Western culture, for example, consent or a particular age of consent, these are boundaries. So, we cannot have complete relativism. So, there was a move towards social relativism, but then the Nuremberg trials were the trials when after the Second World War, the German officials were held on trial. And that was the time when all these German officers and soldiers, they said we were simply following orders. We had the basic training in military is to follow orders, follow the instructions of the authorities. And so that's what we were doing. And our authorities told us to kill, so we killed. They told us to send people to gas chambers, we did. So we cannot be held responsible because we were following the discipline of the military discipline, the military standard of obeying our authorities. So the Nuremberg trials decided that this is not an acceptable excuse. That although in military you are expected to follow orders, but we all are meant to have an inner human compass. And that human compass, that our basic conscience, our conscience can go wrong. But killing innocent children, brutalizing women, just burning people with just ordinary civilians. Now, if your authorities give you an order to do that, then it is your responsibility to disobey it. And even if you have grown up with a particular value system of obeying your authorities, there is a limit to that. So when we are obeying someone, how far do we go in obeying someone? Now that's why when Prabhupada went to America in 1965, there was a huge cult scare. And initially our movement was also programmed for the many incidents that happened. The Nuremberg trials happened in around 1950s kind of thing. But after that, there are some cults which came up. There was one Reverend Jones in Jonestown he had in America, and he claimed that I am God. And then he was doing a lot of unethical things, a lot of criminal things. And one US senator went to investigate, and they killed him over there, and they had a lot of brutal practices. But then what happened was that finally, when it became clear that he's not going to escape, the US government came in force over there. So he told everyone, this is the test of your faith. This is the time, just like Jesus was crucified. This is the time that I am also going to be crucified. I am also going to be killed. But says, if you choose to have faith in me right now, you will all be delivered. And what happened was, at that time, under his instruction, parents gave poison to their children. And then the leader took poison himself, and the whole Georgetown, everybody took poison. And when the government came there, it was just a whole pile of corpses. And now, so from that point onwards, the idea of blind obedience to any authority, now that had to, the American mind became very suspicious of that. The Western mind in general, in the West, in general, whenever you talk about authority, there is distrust of authority. You may have noticed this about culture also. Indian cultures are much more hierarchical, the Western culture is much more egalitarian. So there are many reasons for the distrust of authority, but there have been like horrendous abuses of authority. And those abuses of authority have become imprinted in the Western collective memory. Even if the specific incidents may not be there. So the thing is that are people, I started with the question of, are people innately bad, or do some factors make them bad? And if the factors make them bad, then how much are they responsible for that? Are they responsible, like say, if somebody has a bad authority and that authority tells them to do terrible things, then should we do that or should we not do that? That's an important question. Is that, so continuing that theme, what happened was, so in our movement, so this whole fear of authority was there, and when in our movement we had people leaving their parents, leaving their families, and living a completely cloistered lifestyle, where people are completely disconnected from the world, then that raised to suspicion that we are also like a cult. And many things, like there are like 6-7 typical characteristics of a cult, and unfortunately our movement seem to match all of them. One of them is like disconnect from all previous relationships. Second is don't read any other information sources. Never question your authority. So these are typical signs of a cult. So we faced a lot of challenges. Fortunately at that time, unfortunately, there were also Prabhupada, some of the disciples of Prabhupada were also a bit overambitious, and especially after Srila Prabhupada departed, in order to expand the Krishna consciousness movement, they started doing certain things which were of highly questionable morality and legality. And so, for example, we had one long, huge property somewhere, and through that property, there we wanted to build a big structure. And that property also was a path by which drug dealers could go. So the drug dealers talked with the community leader, and they said, we will give you, because it was our property and we were considered a religious cult, so we had a religious group, so we had our protection. So the drug dealers talked with the religious leader of that community, and the drug dealers were given a safe passageway to go from there. And the drug dealers gave some portion of their money so that we could build our temple. And this is a horrendous thing to do. And why we are talking about it, it's very easy to condemn, condemn cult behavior when we see it outside. And there's when this Islamic states had started, so a lot of people from Europe also joined. Some from America, but a good number of people from Europe. Those were born whites. They joined the Islamic states at that time. So afterwards, some of them were de-radicalized, and then there are interviews given. So I have a friend who has done his PhD in radicalization. It is a very serious social phenomena, Like how do ordinary people seemingly become so deadened, they become radicalized and they become terrorists. So one of the things that came up consistently among many factors is like there was this European British boy, and he said that life is so complex. The reason I joined Islamic States was that Islam offered simple answers to life's complex questions. The big advantage of joining Islam was I don't have to think anymore. If my religious authority tells me do this, do this. If I don't do this, don't do this. That's all. Now, this can seem very disturbingly similar to what I've heard some devotees. Oh, Krishna consciousness makes life so simple. Yeah, it does make life simple. Sometimes. Isn't it? The world is still a complex place. And we are not meant to outsource our decision making to some other authority. The spiritual master and the spiritual guides are meant to be resources so that we make decisions responsibly. Ultimately, Prabhupada said we have to fly our own plane. So the point is that if we look at our tradition, the way you look at Prabhupada taught, Prabhupada taught a lot of philosophy. Prabhupada condemned blind obedience. But the thing is that sometimes in Bhishma's teachings to Mahabharata, it's a very important principle. He says that it's very easy to make rules to prevent bad behavior. That if this is wrong, I will punish anyone who does this. But he says over there that don't just think what good a rule can do when it is applied. Think also what harm the rule can do when it is misapplied. That don't assume that the person who has the authority to implement the rule will always be a good person. And as Bhishma is speaking from his own realizations, that he took a vow to commit himself to the ruler of Hastinapur, and he could not have contemplated that such a deadly combination of a passive king and a malicious prince would come together. So, in general, the overall tenor, the overall mood of Bhishma's teachings to Yudhishthira is that it is not that the purpose of administration is to make the king powerful. The purpose of administration is to make the individual powerful. Powerful in the sense that the individual can make sound decisions. Not that the individual becomes power hungry. So, why are we discussing this over here? That we will talk about Dushasana today. So, Dushasana was the number 2. He was under Duryodhana. And so, how did Duryodhana's influence come upon him? And how much is he guilty or not guilty for this, for what he did? And then tomorrow we'll talk about Duryodhana. So basically, the theme here is that Duryodhana was a person who did seem to have evil tendencies. And if you look at Dushasana's character, it's like this is Duryodhana's. Let's put it this way. This is Duryodhana's trajectory. Duryodhana is going downwards. And then if you look at Dushasana's trajectory, there are times when Dushasana actually moves away from Duryodhana. But then again, he comes back to Duryodhana. So, from what is understood in the Mahabharata, Dushasana was like the trusted right-hand person of Duryodhana. And right from the beginning, whatever be the reason, in traditional culture, obeying your elders is considered to be a standard thing. So there is
today only, tomorrow no class, literally tomorrow.
It is there.
tomorrow one more last class is there. Okay. Yeah. So the thing is that there's one caricature, but it is a telling caricature. That it is that Dushasana followed Duryodhana the way Lakshman followed Ram. But the problem was that Duryodhana was not Ram. So Dushasana always faithfully, so he was right in the scheme when Bhima was poisoned. And then Dushasana, like sometimes there are bad guys, and the bad guys have their enforcers. Enforcers means there's some big building construction. That person is also like a gangster, but then they have their agents who enforce. They those who kill or those who terrorize, those who intimidate. So when Duryodhana made the plan to dishonor Draupadi, whom did he ask to go and get Draupadi? Dushasana. And Dushasana exhibits no hesitation, no fear. He goes gleefully. He just barges into the women's chamber over there. And at that time, what happens is that Draupadi is alone. Normally, the women's chamber, everybody would be together. But Draupadi has just had her period, and that's just ending. And she had just she was just wearing a single cloth because of that. And that's why at that particular time, neither Kunti nor Gandhari were there. When Dushasana went in and dragged her out. He said, I cannot come in this condition. Dushasana said that you are our slave now. We can do whatever you want. And then he dragged her by her hair and brought her and hurled her into the. Now, every single action that he did over there was a horrendous thing. Then, now he trying to disrobe her. It was, there are good people who do good things, there are bad people who do bad things. But there are especially bad people who feel good while doing bad things. Isn't it? That sometimes we have to do bad things because there's just no option. And there is some part of us which even bad people, they have their boundaries. That somebody may say, okay, like like even in many of our devotees do jail preaching. So we have some jail officials who also become devotees. So they say that if somebody is like a child sex abuser, that person will be very unsafe even in jail. Because even prisoners, they don't like somebody who has abused children. And that's why if somebody is a child sex offender, they often have to put them in solitary confinement. Because that person will very easily be killed inside the jail. So they will say everybody in the jail is a criminal. But even criminals have certain sense of boundaries. This is not to be done. So for Dushasana to take joy in what he was doing, that just shows such perversity. And then after that, that's the time when Bhima takes a vow. He said that Bhima takes 2 vows at that time. He said that with the hands that you dragged Draupadi, with the hand pulled her hair, with the hand that you tried to disrobe her, he said, I will cut off your hand. And he said, I will drink your blood and I will kill you. Now Dushasana is having fun at the expense of the Pandavas and Draupadi. But when he hears that, he even visibly trembles for a moment. But then nobody's taking him seriously. Bhima also takes a vow at that time that I will break Duryodhana's thigh and then I will kill him. So when the incidents move forward, so we could say in this particular incident, one says he does something worse than what Duryodhana is doing. Because in Dushasana, it is dealing with Draupadi in the disrobing incident. So somebody else might tell him to do it, but it is he who is doing it. Like a boss may tell you go and shoot this child in the head. Now the boss who tells this is a terrible thing, but somebody who actually goes and kills the child, that's a terrible thing to do. So in many ways, what he does over here is worse. But when Krishna's peace mission is there, at that time, Krishna initially speaks to Dhritarashtra. When Krishna comes as the Shanti Dut, he speaks to Dhritarashtra. And Dhritarashtra, within a few minutes, says, Krishna, everything that you say makes sense to me. I want peace. But my son doesn't listen to me. So please persuade him. So this is the first public admission. It's like something like an open secret. Everybody knows it. Like say in India, the previous government there was one person in the chair, another person was in power. So like that, everybody knew that Duryodhana had the real power, but it was never admitted like that. Like here, Dhritarashtra openly says, that Duryodhana doesn't listen to me. Then Krishna starts speaking to Duryodhana. And what Krishna speaks over there is also amazing. You can have a whole session in conflict resolution, mediation, based on that itself. And of course, ultimately, even our best efforts don't work. So, but Krishna uses Sam, Dam, Hed and Danda. So, he starts with Sam. Sam is what? We share our interests. We have shared interests. Like say, India and China may maybe having border issues, we may have conflicts. But nowadays, there is a small concept of the global south. That the global south is that there is the west and then there's the global south. So India and China are both parts of the economy that are ascending. So we have shared interests. So he says that ultimately, all of you are relatives. You belong to the same dynasty. And the world is filled with kings who are threats. But if you two come together, then no one will be able to destroy you. Not only family ties, but also prudence. Prudence means intelligence. It suggests that you settle the issue, you patch things up. So that's the use of Sam. He elaborates on this. Then there is the Sam, Dam, Danda and Hed. So basically, it's like two people are there. Let's try to understand these four strategies. Two people are there and they are having a conflict with each other. They are fighting against each other. So when conflict is to be resolved, broadly say one way is that we have shared interests. Let's focus on our shared interests. That is the strategy of Sam. So what we have in common is much more than what we have in difference. And that's why it's really not worth fighting. So this is what Prabhupada will also say, your love for me will be shown by how you cooperate. You all may have your individual inspiration, you know all your individual nature, but we are all trying to serve Krishna. We are trying to serve Krishna under the guidance of Srila Prabhupada. So shared interest, that is Sam. Then Dam is where one person says, I will give you a lot. So Dam is where it's more like concessions. Right? I don't want peace. I don't want conflict. So I will accommodate you more and more. So Dam can also refer to allurement. But it's not so much allurement, it's more like concession.
Negotiation.
So not exactly negotiation. Some Dam it's okay, I want peace, so I will settle for less than what is fair because I want to avoid the conflict. Ideally, you should settle for what is fair, but Dam is where I am ready to bend slightly backwards. This is when Krishna says that just give the Pandavas 5 villages. This is the Pandavas actually had a flourishing kingdom. And from there to go down to 5 villages is a very, very big go down, big step down. But Krishna is ready to go to that extent also. And again, it's interesting over here that although the 5 Pandavas are often said to be like 5 fingers, they're all united together. But Krishna does not ask for 1 village for the 5 Pandavas. He asks for 5 villages. You know why? They are Kshatriyas. Everybody needs their space. So, each one of them will need their space, their kshetra over which they can act. Generally, as people grow older, it's just natural that they need their space. So anyway, that is a dana. Now, danda it is more of the show of power. Danda it's show of power. where Krishna tells that it is using a stick means he says that that you think that you will be able to win, but there is absolutely no chance that you can win because Bhima has killed deadly demons whom nobody could kill. And Bhima has taken a vow to kill you, Duryodhana. And he is not going to spare you. And you have so much confidence in Karna, but he has never defeated Arjuna. Arjuna will defeat him. Arjuna has defeated the entire army of the gods, and that too at the very start of his career as an archer at Khandava. Then he has defeated demons whom Indra could not defeat. When Arjuna had gone to the heavens, Indra had asked him to go and kill the demons called with Kavachas. So Arjuna has performed immense austerities and acquired an unmatchable array of celestial weapons. And Krishna goes on and speaks about the power of the Pandavas and what they have done. And then after that, the final one is Bhed. Bhed means on the opposite side, what you do is you focus, if you person, this person is just non-accommodating, is unreasonable, is inflexible. Then try to focus on those who are more reasonable, who are likely to be more flexible. So this is where Krishna unleashes his master stroke. Now, see, when we are speaking also, we are noticing, if you are giving a talk, who is interested, how much interested they are, who are listening, and even when somebody is listening, how much is the person getting persuaded by the listening, how much is that person not getting persuaded. So this Krishna is observing, and Krishna says, like somebody hearing, and the person folds the hand and looks backward, shifts backward. They're becoming more and more defensive or more and more aggressive. They are not really accepting this. So he sees that Duryodhana on one side is becoming more and more inflexible. But he sees Dushasana is weakening. When especially Krishna speaks over the promise of Bhima and what Bhima has vowed to do to Duryodhana and to Dushasana, Dushasana again feels chill go through his body. And when Krishna completes his speech, that time Dushasana bursts out. He said, we should all listen to Keshav and we should settle for peace. And then finally, the Duryodhana glares at him. This is the one time when Dushasana seems to have a spine. And then he turns to Dhritarashtra and he says, and if Duryodhana does not listen to us, then we should arrest Duryodhana and hand him over to Keshav. When this happens, Duryodhana just, what's happening over here? How dare he go against me? And then Duryodhana just walks out. Now for all the other 98 Kauravas, this has never happened. There has been never dissension at the top. It's like number 1 and number 2. They're going always together. Now they don't know what to do, whom to follow. But they think, in most of the Dhritarashtra's interactions, it is Dhritarashtra is always being affectionate to Duryodhana. So they think that if I have to choose between the two of them, Duryodhana clearly has more power, and Duryodhana is the main person who has come up with all the schemes. So one by one, they all walk out. Now Dushasana is left all alone. And now he's looking at the door where everybody is walked out, and looking at Duryodhana, he's looking at the assembly, everyone, and he's undecided. And there's that one moment, there's few moments when he's wavering. So everybody who is following a bad authority, if somebody is following a bad authority, there is a moment in their life when their own conscience wakes up. Sometime or the other it happens with everyone. But that is the time when do they listen to their conscience. It is that if somebody is told to something horrible, Now, like yesterday we discussed that sometimes to function in the world, we may have to do certain things. We cannot just be idealistic. Certain adjustments need to be done. But how far do we go in that? Is there a limit to that? So there are some times when the conscience does awake. And when the conscience awakens, at that time, what do we do? So, Dushasana has that moment. But he says, okay, everybody has gone. I'm all alone over here. He also walks. And now, Duryodhana is also expert. Duryodhana is angry with Dushasana, but he doesn't want to lose Dushasana also. So they have gone to a nearby room and they're talking. And then Duryodhana hears Dushasana's footsteps coming in. And Duryodhana is so cunning. And now Dushasana is thinking, should I enter the room? Still now he's torn. Should I go back there? Should I come here? And at that time, Duryodhana is speaking to his brothers. He says, this Keshava is a very dangerous person. He can speak in such a way that he can bewilder everyone. You have to be very careful with him. Anybody can be fooled by his words. And that's what happened to our dear Dushasana, isn't it? And Dushasana is poking his head. Dushasana, yeah, that's what happened to me. And now the modern term for this is gaslighting. What happens is that gaslighting is where one person is doing something wrong and other person is trying to do something right, but he's distort the whole picture in such a way that you make that person only guilty for having done something wrong. Like somebody is an alcoholic and they have a spouse or a sibling or somebody who's trying to stop their alcoholism. And when they come, you cannot be doing like this. They come all angry. And this alcoholic is so cunning. Says, if you had not been such a terrible person, I would not have had to drink. And instead of this person thinking, I have to give alcoholism, the other person thinking, okay, yeah, I have to become a better person. And that person continues their alcoholism. So, Duryodhana, basically, he gaslights Dushasana. Now, Dushasana is not necessarily, they're not saying he is a good person. He also went along throughout. And he could say he was a brother. So there was a familial bond also. But the thing is that he had that chance. He had that chance to come out. But so actually following any authority is meant to strengthen our conscience, not silence our conscience. That the following authority is very important because what happens is right now our conscience, our inner voice, whether it is the voice of our Vivek Buddhi or the voice of our Mana, we don't really know that right. Now, the conscience, what is it meant to do is, when we follow an authority, what it is meant to do is, authority is meant to, with respect to our conscience, that by following the authority, our sense of right and wrong becomes clearer. Our conscience is meant to be strengthened. Meant to be strengthening our conscience, not silencing our conscience. So, if you see in the Bhagavad Gita also, it is Krishna tells us Sarvadharman Pratyumamikam Sharanam Arjuna. But it is not that after that Krishna is micro-controlling Arjuna. It is not that before every arrow that Arjuna shoots, Arjuna has to consult Krishna. Should I shoot this arrow? Should I shoot this arrow? No, Arjuna is an individual in his own right. And he is making decisions. And sometimes Krishna insists that you act in this way, but many times Krishna goes along with Arjuna. So Krishna has not given us our individuality and our intelligence so that we can give it up. No, he has given us our individuality and intelligence so that we can develop it. So that we can purify it and use it in a healthy way. And Dushasana has that moment of awakening. But unfortunately, he does not take that moment of awakening. And when he accepts Duryodhana, he's also cunning over here. He says, It is not that you betrayed me. It's that it was Keshav. Keshav is a very deceptive person. Keshav is a very tricky speaker. So then Dushasana's fate is sealed at that time. Now in the subsequent war, Dushasana is one of the key fighters on the Kaurava side. Although he's not as good as Duryodhana, but he's also a formidable warrior. And as a formidable warrior, what happens is that there are many occasions when Dushasana shows his prowess. And Dushasana is tasked with stopping Shikhandi from reaching Bhima. And he actually, the whole Kaurava, Pandava, many Pandava forces try to help Shikhandi get past Dushasana. They don't succeed. It's only when Arjuna comes. And Arjuna is the person who is able to force Dushasana to fall back. And then, by the 17th day, the first half of the 17th day, Bhima has killed 98 of the Kaurava brothers. So only Dushasana and Duryodhana are remaining. So then, now when Dushasana does feel some fear, and now like one by one, like somebody will have like a kill list, and they have a kill list, and then everybody has been on that. Tick it off. So I have a hit list. Okay, hit list or kill list, yeah. So I have a friend, a devotee friend in Israel. So they say in Israel, in the big streets, all the Hamas leaders that are there, the Hezbollah leaders that are there, they have like the big pictures and cross. So whoever has been killed, who has not been killed, they have put that like that. Now, of course, they have to compromise because they want to get the refugees back. And many of those people in their arrested, they have to release. But the point is that now he knows that he is next on the hit list. So Dushasana fights. And on the 17th day, that is the time when Bhima, he knows that he's close to victory. And he is now going to succeed. So Bhima and Dushasana are fighting. And both of them are fighting with bow and arrow. And the fight just goes on. It seems to be indecisive. And then when a fight becomes too long and indecisive, Bhima becomes impatient. So Bhima just puts aside his bow and arrow. It's useless. And just jumps off his chariot. And he jumps with his mace. Now Bhima is huge. His mace is huge. And now Dushasana starts shooting arrows. And Bhima is just whirling his mace that the arrows just get flung everywhere. Now Dushasana is shooting arrows frantically and some of the arrows hit Bhima. But Bhima is so now filled with the energy and the rage to get to Dushasana that Dushasana's arrows, even when they pierce Bhima, they seem to have no effect on him. And Dushasana is seeing Bhima charging towards him. He starts feeling his fear starts growing towards terror. And then he thinks that still Bhima is some distance away and he sees Bhima closing in, he's just thinking of jumping off his chariot. And Bhima notices that. That's what Dushasana is going to do. And Bhima just hurls his mace. That mace flies through the air and hits Dushasana on the body. And Dushasana flies off the chariot. What he wanted to do happens, but in a completely different way. He can't jump off the chariot, he's thrown off the chariot. And now when Bhima is angry, he starts roaring in anger. The description that, and sometimes you have to do mace fighting, just enter into the Kaurava camp. And when you enter into the Kaurava camp, he would just be destroying everyone around him with his punches and with his mace. And sometimes, because he would be right in the enemy army, that his whole body would be covered with the blood of the enemies. His own blood also, because he would also get wounded, with the blood of the enemies also. So he would whole be like a nightmarish vision in red, with only his eyes and his teeth as white, as he's laughing and roaring. And just the sight of him would cause the Kauravas to just get alarmed and drop their weapons and run away. And then flung on the ground. Both the impact of the fall and the impact of the blow. He tries to get up and run. Bhima just leaps through the air and bounces on him. Just pounding him. Now, this is one of the, because sometimes, there's an action movie and there's a horror movie. So, there can be action also, which can be quite horrendous. So, this is one scene in the Mahabharata, which is like, like you can have sexuality which is adult, you can have violence which is also adult violence. So, it is a bit like that. So then Bhima just pounds him and pounds him. And then finally, Bhima, Dushasana is trying to fight back, but Bhima's rage and force is such that nobody can do anything. And Bhima is roaring in anger, and his roars are such that, seeing this, everyone is petrified. So at that time, when Karna is fighting, and Karna's mouth falls open in order. And Bhima is in such a rage that nobody dares to even intervene. If they intervene, if they try to attack him, Bhima's rage will turn toward them. And they're just watching as this whole event is unfolding. And then Bhima just raises his sword and cuts off the arm of Dushasana, the arm with which he had dragged Draupadi. And as Dushasana screams in horror. And as the arm is cut off, the blood starts shooting out. And then as that blood comes out, Bhima picks the blood in his palms, and then he rises up and he looks around and he brings that blood to his mouth. And then he roars, he says, he brings that blood to his mouth, his whole face becomes bloodied. And then he says, "This is sweeter than my mother's milk. This is sweeter than the most delicious food that I have ever eaten." And seeing this, when Karna drops his bow, he says, "This is not a human being. This is a Rakshasa." What is this? Seeing this happening, everybody starts running away. So later on, Gandhari hears this. And Gandhari, when the Pandavas go to meet the Gandhari and Dhritarashtra after the war is over, Gandhari asks Bhima, "How could you have drunk his blood?" So Bhima says that you should know that I brought the blood to my mouth, but my mouth was closed. So that blood does not go into his mouth. But Bhima what is he doing over here? See, in war, there are all mental games. And Bhima is using the tactic of intimidation over here. It's like, to scare someone. If the enemy can do something like this, I don't even want to fight against this enemy. Isn't it? So Bhima just wants to finish the war off. And then Bhima then takes his sword and then he cuts off the head of Dushasana. And Dushasana is already in immense pain, he becomes almost senseless. With a final scream, he passes away. He dies, and then Bhima turns out his face and body are bloodied. And then he starts roaring. He's remembering how Draupadi had been dishonored and how this person was responsible. And then he roars, "Duryodhana, you are next now." So now, here, this is how Dushasana meets his end. I'll make 2 points about Bhima, and then we'll end over here. If you have any questions, one or two we can take. So now, among the Pandavas, Bhima is, as I mentioned, he's the most Kshatriya kind of Pandava. He's like a Kshatriya squared. So Yudhishthira go like the Brahmana kind of Kshatriya. So Yuddhe Chapya Apalayana. Yuddhe Chapya Apalayana is the character of Kshatriya. Now what that means is that not only that a person does not run away from the battlefield, but in general, if there's a confrontation, the person does not flinch from the confrontation. If you want to fight, let's fight. Like it could be a verbal fight, it could be a physical fight, it could be a martial fight, it could be a political fight, whatever it is. A person does not flinch from the fight. Now, is the cause worth fighting? That is something very important to consider. Now, I'll talk about two incidents which broadly nuance Bhima's character. So Bhima might seem to be like a very almost like a bloodthirsty kind of person, but he's not like that. Bhima is extremely powerful, and yet, see, among all the Pandavas, it is Bhima who Duryodhana finds most insecurity inducing for him. Because not only he had been the eldest, but he, among the Kauravas, he had also been the strongest. Dushasana was like a close second to him, but whenever they would wrestle, they would do fighting, he would defeat all other Kauravas and he would inevitably defeat Dushasana also. But there was this one person, Bhima, he was no match to him. So when now Bhima used to enjoy exhibiting his strength. Now he was not malicious at any time, like Duryodhana. Malicious means wanting to hurt others. But he just had that sense of energy and exhilaration in exhibiting his energy. So when they had this Jalakrida, Jalotsav, so all the Kauravas and the Pandavas would go to nearby river and they would play in the river. So Bhima would just pick up everyone and throw them into the water. And in many ways, it was just fun. But he did the same thing to Duryodhana. And Duryodhana found it humiliating. And just flung him away. So, and that happened in front of all his brothers. So, in the way the naak kat jati hai. So, Duryodhana felt like that. Now Bhima, it might seem that he was just showing off his prowess and he was insensitive. He did not really sense what Duryodhana was going through. It's possible that maybe Bhima could have been a little more restrained in exhibiting his power. Like sometimes if we understand that somebody else might feel a little insecure when something is happening, when a particular thing is happening, then we might want to downplay our display of our opulence or our power. I remember at one place when in North America, at one place, there are multiple gurus who are going to give initiation together. So Arhan Khan is also there. He's also going to give initiation. And 3 gurus, so there's the other spiritual masters had about 15-20 disciples to initiate. And Maharaj had about 500 disciples to initiate. So then Maharaj said, at that place, I'll initiate only 20 disciples. I'll not initiate them. You can have a separate initiation later on. So the idea is that even the Ram, when Ram is telling Sita, you stay in the palace. You stay in the palace initially. So Ram tells Sita, while you are in the palace, if you encounter Bharat, don't praise me in front of Bharat. Praise Bharat at that time. Because the idea is that although Bharat is virtuous, but still, we should not deliberately show our superiority in a way that makes the other person feel insecure or inferior. Now, of course, in the Pandavas, they had the Rasuya Yajna. At that time, others were bringing gifts. So, now Duryodhana could have chosen any other service. Unfortunately, he chose or accepted the service of getting the gifts. It is like, we'll talk about Duryodhana more. It is like, just like there are certain things which, if somebody is alcoholic, certain places or things trigger their alcoholism. So, like that, we know if we have envy and certain things trigger our envy, then it is both our responsibility to not go into those situations. And if we sense that somebody else is envious of us, then we should not exhibit our opulence in front of them, which will trigger their envy. As much as possible. Sometimes for our servants it may be required. But the thing is that, so we could say Bhima could have been a little more sensitive over there. But to his credit, it's not that Bhima was just ruthless and violent. That when Bhima came back after being saved from the poison, at that time, He was told, there are different narratives about how he was told. One was that when he went underwater, when he got nectar that time, the Devatas over there told him that this was all arrangement of Duryodhana. The other narrative is that Yudsu is the half brother of the Kauravas, and Yudsu, he is the one person among the Kauravas who survives. He is the person who performed the last rites of the Kauravas. And just before the war begins, at that time, Yudhishthira calls out to the warriors on the opposite side, says, all of you know that my cause is virtuous. If you want to come over to my side, you will have my shelter and protection. And when he calls that out, there's like one last call. So Yudsu from the Kaurava side comes over to the Pandava side. So the other narratives, like Mahabharata has different versions. So Yudsu tells him that I saw that it was Bhima who dragged you, and it was Duryodhana who dragged you and put you into the ocean. So Bhima is enraged. He wants to teach Duryodhana a lesson. But he talks with Yudhishthira, and Yudhishthira, now either Yudhishthira tells him that at this point we have no evidence for this. So you were the victim, already everyone knows that there is a tension between you and Bhima, Duryodhana. So if you claim this, all that will happen is that we have split in the family. Most likely, Dhritarashtra will support Duryodhana. And then we will simply be suspected more. We may be accused of making a false accusation. We may be sentenced. We may be exiled. So either Yudhishthira says this or the other narrative that Vidura tells him this. But either way, the point is that Bhima restrains himself at that time. And similarly, when Krishna is going as the peace messenger, the final round of peace they try. So at that time, Bhima also says to Krishna, Krishna, you are expert at everything. Please try to settle for peace. Now Krishna cannot resist teasing Bhima over here. He said, Bhima, you have taken such vows of destroying the Kauravas. It is true indeed that even the greatest heroes lose their courage when the actual moment of war comes. Bhima gets angry, I am not losing my courage. But he said, a war will be brutal. The costs of the war will be devastating for everyone. That is why I am requesting you to settle peacefully. Now Draupadi is not happy about this, but she also gives her consent. So it's not that Bhima is just indiscriminately angry and just wanting to kill everyone. So Bhima, he does feel now when he destroyed Dushasana. One of the reasons also is that Bhima feels a sense of, he has taken that vow, of course, but Bhima also feels a personal sense of failure that Abhimanyu, he had promised Abhimanyu that we will go inside. We'll follow you inside, we'll destroy from inside. And Dushasana had been one of the persons who had been among the 6 warriors who targeted Abhimanyu. It was Dushasana's son who had killed Abhimanyu. So all that pent-up rage comes in. But when Bhima kills Duryodhana, so that Dushasana, that happens on the 17th day. And that's the time when Gandhari decides that I have to take things in my own hands. And she travels from Hastinapur, she comes to Kurukshetra. So what happens over there? In Duryodhana's story, we will discuss tomorrow. But the key point over here is that Dushasana meets his due ends. He's done what he has done is horrendous. He is a Atataina and he deserves to be killed. He's an aggressor. What he has done is brazen, naked aggression he has done. And he deserves to be killed. But now in his killing, there is no immorality. Like the other Kaurava warriors, when they kill, there's some question about morality. Here it is more a question of brutality. How could somebody do like this? But Bhima does clarify. And since Krishna is there at that time, Krishna also not so. He acts as if he has drunk it. And that is, again, Bhima is trying to intimidate so that the war will end faster. And those who are still fighting, they will lose their fighting spirit. So Dushasana's story is, it's like he is a person who is a villain, but again, if you consider on a spectrum, now Dhritarashtra is completely passive. Dushasana is much more active, and Duryodhana is the most active. It's like, you can have a villain scale. So this is the passive villain. This is the most active villain, and now he's also active, but it is, would Dushasana himself have done any of the brutal things himself if Duryodhana had not been there? We don't know. Maybe not. So Dushasana, is there anything that he does on his own? Is there any evil that he does on his own without Duryodhana telling him to do it? There is no instance of that also. So it's now the difference between Dushasana and Karna is that Dushasana is more bound by a family relationship. And in many ways, Dushasana and Duryodhana, the closer that comes to is Kumbhakarna and Ravana. So now Dushasana and Duryodhana relation is somewhat similar. And the key difference over here is that Kumbhakarna, for him, is like he has this moment that when Hanuman has come and destroyed or burnt half of Lanka and devastated the morale of the Rakshasas also, it is an insult to them that one upstart monkey can come and devastate their defenses. So at that time, Kumbhakarna has his moment and he says that, oh Ravan, you are consulting us now how to deal with this danger. Why did you not consult us before when you went and abducted Sita? You are saying that a king should act by consulting his advisors. Why did you not consult us at that time? Still, it is your fortune that you have a brother like me who will clean up your mess. He doesn't use those words, but he says that I will destroy Ram whenever he comes. Now, Ravan feels insulted by these words, smarting under the chastisement that is being given. But he needs Kumbhakarna and he just restrains himself and thanks Kumbhakarna for his support. So the psychological dynamics are slightly different over there. But the thing is, Dushasana is an example of a person who does bad things by blindly obeying a bad person. So in the Vedic tradition, as I to just reinforce that point once again, that any guide that we have, like our intelligence is there and we have guides. So if I am here, now we are never meant to outsource our intelligence to our guide. That means that you decide everything for me. Actually, our guide is meant to be a resource for our intelligence. That through whoever guide we have, they are meant to train us in our intelligence. Ultimately, the whoever guide we have, that guide is not going to be there with us all the time. And even if that guide is very noble-hearted, even that guide is very selfless, but when we become dependent on that guide, what do you do when that guide is not there? Many times, in America at least, there is a whole program to try to integrate war veterans back into society. Because when they go into the war and army, they are all trained to follow orders. But when they retire from the army, now if there is no one to tell them what to do, they just don't know what to do. And they find it very, very difficult to live at that time. So every human being has a need for autonomy. And autonomy is a certain level, like the Pandavas, Pandavas all followed Yudhishthira. But Krishna also recognized each of them needs their own village. So we all have a certain need for autonomy. The exact degree of autonomy may vary according to time, place, circumstance, according to culture, according to role, so many things like that. But the idea is that no authority should be used to either replace our conscience or our intelligence. Earlier what I was talking about conscience. Conscience is more of like an innate feeling, hey, this is something wrong. Maybe I should not be doing this. Intelligence is more based on reason. We reason, we analyze, and then we decide. But either way, our conscience and our intelligence both are resources for our decision making. And these resources are meant to be strengthened by our discipline, by the discipline that we follow. Discipline of, say, following the guide. Krishna says, that Tatviti Pranipatena. What happens after that? The next verse is Yajgyatva. Sorry, no. That whole verse is there, but what is the result of that? That's 434. 435. Yajgyatva na punarmoham evam yasasi pandava. By knowing this, you will not fall into illusion again. Yena bhutanya shishani drakshasya atmanyato mayim. He's saying they are tattvadarshi and you will become tattvadarshi. It's not that they are the seers of the truth and by following them you will become a seer of truth. Not that you will become eternally dependent on them for seeing the truth. So that is, there has to be not just a transmission of knowledge or a giving of instructions. There has to be a transmission of vision by which if the authority is able to see much more far-sighted, much more wisely, then we should also be able to see wisely. And that is the principle. Now, none of this is meant to minimize the principle of following authority. We all need to follow our authorities. We all need to, Yasya Prasada, Bhagavad Prasada. We all need guidance. Our intelligence, our conscience, right now is contaminated. But we have to know the purpose of following it. The purpose of following it is that ultimately we should also be able to think for ourselves. So, there's a difference between education and indoctrination. So what Srila Prabhupada wanted was education. Education is about how to think. It is more about the process that we follow. Okay, how do we arrive, how do we do reasoning based on scripture? Indoctrination is what to think. This is the answer, just accept this. Don't think anything more. So what Krishna does to Arjuna is, he is giving him guidance for education, not for indoctrination. So, education also requires, of course, accepting authority. We have to hear from a teacher, we have to hear from a guide. But the purpose is to be clear. The purpose is that we should be able to think. Prabhupada wanted us to be independently thoughtful. So, I'll summarize what we discussed today. Mainly 3 points. We have discussed Dushasana's story. And the point was discussing about blind obedience. That is the theme. So I started by discussing about are people innately good? Is everybody innately good or innately bad? So what we discussed was that, I will discuss this more, but at the level of soul, everybody is good. At the level of the mind, we all have conditions. And it's generally both. So how much does, if we are innately good, then it's like society. So it's like there's a question between individual and others. Others is society. So is it individual good and individual is the individual is good and society makes him bad? Or is it the individual is bad and has to be made good by society? So that's the question. So we applied this dynamic to the influence of Duryodhana on Dushasana. So how much were Dushasana's decisions, actions he is responsible, and how much is Duryodhana responsible? So we discussed how Duryodhana has his own trajectory, and Dushasana's trajectory is he goes downwards, he comes up, but ultimately he meets the same end. So he has everybody who is following a bad authority. They may do sometimes terrible things. This was the Disrobing incident. But then he had his moment of awakening as a peace mission. So he unfortunately did not take that. And also how Duryodhana gaslighted him. It's not that you were misled, it's actually Keshava was misleading you. And then finally, we talk about Bhima's intimidation. Intimidation is scare tactics. So in a war, sometimes to demoralize the opponents, At Bhima, we discussed that his killing of Dushasana is brutal. Dushasana's killing, that is brutal, although it's not actually as brutal as it seems, not drinking the blood. But we see the other side of his character also. He is a reasonable person. And that reasonability is seen in his, after he's poisoned, he agrees to stand down. Although he wants to get back at him. And also, before the peace mission, he also says that let's try to settle it peacefully. But ultimately, the Kauravas are not ready to listen, and that's why they have to be punished. And we discussed the key lesson for us is that whatever, if we are here and we have any guide, the purpose of the guide is to actually strengthen our conscience and to strengthen our intelligence. It is not that we outsource it to them. So in this way, we all, by taking guidance from worthy authorities, can become better. And if somehow something goes wrong and our authorities start, we come under questionable authorities, then we will have our intelligence and conscience ready to be able to make the right choice even in those situations. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
If one question can be taken. Prabhuji, I have seen observation while you were speaking all this today with very little experience. I was able to relate to something. Nature of a person when he comes to any institution to follow an authority, right? You see some people who say, "Oh, whatever Guru told is perfect. We are going to follow it. We'll do it. There is no deviation." They are very clear about it. But the same people, after some time, do extreme things against the Guru also. Because sometimes we see that the tendency of keeping Guru as a reason to do what they are doing is actually the nature of doing what they want to do. They show their independence as if they are dependent, but actually they exhibit their independence only. Right? I mean, is that a right? Can you throw light on that?
Very true. Humility or submission. It can be, it is meant to actually be like a path to self-realization, path to Krishna ultimately. Amanitvam. That is the first characteristic of humility, of knowledge. Yeah, that's what it's meant to be. But many times it can be the password to power. How password to power? See, I am so submissive to my authority, therefore all of you should be that submissive to me. Now what happens is, in this situation quite often, that person's authority is not really trying to micro-control their life. That person's authority gives them a lot of autonomy. But then they don't use that autonomy to others. So I think this is very much a danger. And unfortunately what happens is, these declarations of, whatever the Guru says is right, and those are often seen as signs of great Guru Bhakti. And are they really signs of great Guru Bhakti? So what happens in general, whenever we are telling on authority, one extreme is to idolize the authority. Idolizes that this authority is completely perfect. And sometimes those very same people go to the other extreme and demonize the authority. That demonize, in many ways, the Rithvik philosophy. It is whatever the reason for it. And those who are following it are also dedicated in their own way. We're not criticizing them. But it's a reaction to this idea that the Guru is completely perfect. And then there were phases when some of our spiritual leaders had issues. So then you go to the other side and Prabhupada is the only Guru. And everybody who else claims to be a Guru is actually a usurper. Is actually unauthorized. And is actually taking the privilege that is meant only for Prabhupada. So it's almost like demonizing them. So actually, in between, we could say, is to humanize. Now, what does humanize mean? Now, we will say that actually there is that verse where Guru Shunaramati. To think of the Guru as an ordinary human being is a hellish mentality. But let's be carefully understand what it means. It is that Arche Vishnu Shulari, that we don't think of the deity to be stone. Now, the deity, is it stone? Of course it is stone. But it is much, much more than stones. Isn't it? That just like, is a currency note paper? Of course it is paper. But it is so much more than paper that the fact that it is paper, it is almost completely overlooked except for certain functional purposes. That is, it can get torn, it's subject to something sharp, or it can get wet and spoiled or something like that. So otherwise, we don't treat it like paper at all. But still, it is subject to the damage that paper can go through. Similar deities are not stone. We say if we have wooden deity, and then if we exhibit, if subjected to water, if you do water abhishek, jala abhishek of a wooden deity, then after the abhishek we'll have to do painting again, isn't it? We cannot do that. So similarly, the Guru is not a human being means that the Guru is so devoted to Krishna that to see the Guru as a human being is a hellish mentality, means to see that the Guru's actions that reduce the Guru to the level that there is nothing spiritual about the actions. The Guru is connected with Krishna, and because the Guru is connected with Krishna, therefore what the Guru is speaking has a divine purpose. So that has to be carefully understood. But thank you. So, but that does not mean that, say, just as we human beings, we cannot be at two places at the same time. Similarly, the spiritual master, we want to be at two places, but we cannot be at two places. The spiritual master is very dedicated. The spiritual master also has 24 hours a day only. They want to spend time with all the disciples, but they can't. They can't. So in that sense, the human limitation in terms of the selfishness that drives most human beings, that is not there in the spiritual master. But the human limitation that comes from having a body, that is there. So once that time there was the BJP, the Hindu Mahasabha. He met Prabhupada. Swamiji, you pronounce verses in a very Bengali way. You pronounce Sanskrit verses in a Bengali way. And Prabhupada said, what can I do? I am a Bengali. So now, Prabhupada had come from Bengal. So naturally he would have a Bengali accent. A Bengali way of singing or pronouncing. But what he was speaking was not Bengali wisdom. That was universal wisdom. So that point has to be considered that, that we need to not, if we idolize the spiritual master, quite often we'll go to the opposite side and go to the complete reject the authority itself. So humanize doesn't mean reduce to human being, but recognize that there are, everybody has their, so I'll just be careful, if you're going to make a picture of this, be careful about what I will say. Humanize does not mean that they have selfish human motivations. That is not what it means. What it means is that they have practical human limitations. So Prabhupada, the way he functioned, he never claimed he was omniscient. He would take decisions based on the information that he was given. If the information was wrong, then Prabhupada took decisions based on that. And when Prabhupada was given more correct information, he would take decisions based on that. So in that sense, we have to be careful. Thank you.
And the power went off.
Okay.
Only one question.
Okay.
Vikarna, Prabhu, there is a talk about Vikarna also, that he also was against this act of but why he not in that list?
Okay, see, Vikarna is not mentioned as a very significant character. He does oppose Duryodhana at that time, but afterwards there's no incident that he stands up to Duryodhana. And when Bhima kills Vikarna, at that time it is said that Bhima remembers that Vikarna had stood up to oppose what had happened to Draupadi. He remembers that, and it is according to some narratives of the Mahabharata, they said that when Bhima would kill the Kauravas, that there are some ways you offer respect to the dead person also. Like when Bhima falls, the Pandavas do a parikrama of Bhima's body. So like that, Bhima does a parikrama of Vikarna's body. He is the only Kaurava for whom he does that. So there is some offering of the respect, but there's no description that Vikarna opposes Duryodhana or in the peace mission. Only Dushasana stands up at that time.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much. Shri Krishna Bhagwan ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai, Gaur Premanande.